The Battle of Thermopylae, the sacrifice that changed the world. Prologue. The echo of eternity. More than 2,500 years ago, before empires crumbled and civilizations were erased by the relentless sands of time, before Rome became mistress of the known world, before Alexander conquered from Greece to India, a narrow pass in the rugged mountains of Greece witnessed a battle the world would never forget, a clash that would transcend time, span generations, and become the ultimate symbol of courage, sacrifice, and resistance against all odds. They called it the Battle of Thermopylae, a confrontation so devastating, so unequal, so utterly impossible that even today historians pore over ancient texts and wonder, with a mix of admiration and disbelief, how it could have happened, how such a small force could hold back an overwhelming human tide, how 300 men could defy an empire that stretched from India to Egypt. At the burning heart of that battle, where the Mediterranean sun scorched like the merciless judgment of the ancient gods, where bronze reflected the midday light and blood stained the rocky ground, a Spartan king became immortal. His name was Leonidas, son of Anaxandridas, direct descendant of Heracles according to Spartan legend, king of Sparta, warrior from his first breath of life, and the man who would face the greatest army ever assembled in human history, with just 300 soldiers by his side. This is not a legend, forged by drunken bards in dark tavern. This is not a myth created to entertain children around the fire. This is history, bloody, brutal history, documented by chroniclers who witnessed the events or spoke with those who did. History that shaped the destiny of the Western world and whose echo still resonates in our days. Part 1. The storm forms in the east, the empire that devoured the world. It was the year 480 BC, and the world was about to change forever. In the vast Persian Empire, which stretched from the eastern shores of the Mediterranean to the borders of India, from Egypt to the Black Sea, King Xerxes I had made a decision that would determine the fate of two civilizations. Xerxes was no ordinary man. Son of Darius the Great, he had inherited not just an empire, but an obsession. His father had tried to conquer Greece 10 years earlier and been humiliated at the Battle of Marathon. 10,000 Persians dead. Defeat at the hands of a city-state that his empire could swallow without effort. The shame had consumed Darius until his death. Now, Xerxes had assembled an army that Greek chroniclers describe as impossible to count. Herodotus, the father of history, who traveled the ancient world collecting testimonies and documents, estimated between 1 and 2 million soldiers, a number so absurd it seemed like fiction. Modern historians, with their analyses of ancient military logistics, calculate around 100,000 to 300,000 men, still a colossal army by the standards of the time. The exact number, however, matters less than what it represented. It was the largest army the Western world had ever seen, a multinational force that included Persians, Medes, Scythians, Indians, Arabs, Egyptians, peoples from every corner of the known empire, each contingent with its own weapons, tactics, and war tradition. A war machine so vast that, according to ancient accounts, when it stopped to drink from a river, it left it dry. The objective: Persian Empire to the ends of the known world, fulfilling the manifest destiny of an empire that saw itself as the center of the civilized universe. But above all, it was about power, about showing the world that defying Persia was futile, that resistance was pointless, that the empire was as inevitable as the rising sun. A divided Greece. The Greek city-states, upon receiving news of the approaching Persian army, were in their natural state, divided, distrustful of one another, unprepared to face an existential threat. Greece was not a unified nation. It was a collection of hundreds of independent city-states, each with its own government, laws, and interests. Athens, the nascent democracy, had its formidable naval fleet, the triremes that dominated the Mediterranean. It had Themistocles, the brilliant strategist who saw beyond the horizon. But it also had corrupt politicians, warring factions, and a population that had not forgotten that just a generation earlier, tyrants had ruled their streets. Sparta, the military oligarchy, had its legendary warriors, men molded from birth for a single purpose, war. But Sparta was isolationist, wary of distant campaigns, bound by traditions and religious laws that often prevented swift action. It was a society of warriors living in constant fear that their own slaves, the Helots, who outnumbered the Spartans, would rebel. The other city-states ranged from those that wanted to resist to those ready to submit to the Persians in exchange for local autonomy. Some had already sent earth and water to Xerxes, the traditional gesture of submission. Others waited to see which side would win before choosing. No one had an army capable of facing the Persian tide advancing through Thrace like an unstoppable flood, destroying everything in its path, accepting the submission of terrified cities, or raising those that resisted. Part 2. The King Who Chose Immortality. Leonidas's decision. It was in this moment of chaos, division, and fear that Leonidas, king of Sparta, made a decision that would change history forever. A decision that required not just military courage, but strategic vision and a deep understanding of what was at stake. Leonidas was about 60 years old when he received news that the Persians were crossing the Hellespont, the narrow waterway between Europe and Asia, where Xerxes had ordered a bridge of boats built so long that it took days for his army to cross. 60 years in an era when most men did not live to 40. But 60 years for a Spartan meant 6 decades of continuous training, battle experience, and tested leadership. It was too late to assemble the full Spartan army. The Olympic Games were underway, that sacred tradition that transcended even war, when all hostilities ceased, and Greeks from all cities gathered in holy truce. Spartan religious law, which governed every aspect of their lives, strictly prohibited military campaigns during this sacred period. Moreover, there was the Carnea, a Spartan religious festival that also forbade military operation. For any other leader, these restrictions would have ended the discussion. But Leonidas knew that if he did nothing immediately, if he waited for the religious and political bureaucracy to complete its rituals, Greece would fall before it could even defend itself. The Persians would be in Athens, in Corinth, perhaps at the very gates of Sparta itself before the full army could be mobilized. The chosen 300. So Leonidas made a decision that only a Spartan king could make. He selected 300 men. But these were not just any men. It was not a random or convenient selection. It was the elite of the elite, the cream of an entire society dedicated to producing the greatest warriors the world had ever known. They were all pure-blooded Spartan, full citizens, not Periaci, free inhabitants without political rights, or Helots, state slaves. Each was over 30 years old, the age when a Spartan reached full maturity and gained complete political rights. Each had male sons who could continue their lineages, an essential consideration, since Leonidas knew he was choosing men to die. The continuation of Spartan families had to be ensured. Each had been trained since the age of 7 for one thing: total war. Not war as other Greeks knew it, not war as the rest of the world practiced it. War as art, science, religion, and life's purpose all in. 1. The forge of steel, the Agoge. To understand what these 300 men represented, one must understand the Agoge, the Spartan training system that had no parallel in the ancient world, and produced warriors of such superior quality that a single Spartan was literally worth 10 ordinary soldiers in combat. In Sparta, the process began at birth. Newborns were taken to a council of elders who examined them carefully. Weak, sick, or deformed babies were taken to the Ephialtes, a cliff in the Taygetus Mountains, and left to die. not out of gratuitous cruelty, but because Sparta was a small city-state, constantly threatened, surrounded by slaves who outnumbered them 10-1. It could not afford to support those who could not defend the polis. Those who passed this brutal first selection lived with their mothers until age 7. Then, in a ceremony that tore families apart but forged warriors, the boys were ripped from their homes and handed over to the state. From that moment, they no longer belonged to their families. They belonged to Sparta. The Agoge began brutally and only got worse. 7-year-old boys were organized into troops, each led by an older youth. They were deliberately underfed, not due to scarcity, but by design. The idea was to force them to steal food, developing cunning, courage, and skill for covert operations. But if caught stealing, they were brutally whipped, not for stealing, but for getting caught. The lesson was clear. Be clever, be stealthy, be efficient, or suffer. They slept on hard bunks made of reeds they gathered themselves from the Eurotas River. No mattresses, no heating, even in the harsh mountain winters. They went barefoot year-round, toughening their feet until they could march over rocky terrain without pain. They received only one cloak per year, a red mantle that would become a symbol of terror on battlefields across Greece, forged in pain. The physical training was relentless. Daily fights, sometimes to the death. Endurance runs through the mountain. Weapon training from the earliest age, first with wooden sticks, then with real spears, heavy shields, sharp swords. They learned to move in formation, to breathe together, to think as a single unit. But the Agoge forged more than muscles. It forged minds. The boys learned to read and write, but only the essential. Elaborate rhetoric was despised. Laconic responses, the word derived from Laconia, Sparta's region, were valued. Few words, maximum impact. They learned music and poetry, but not for entertainment. War songs that synchronized movements in battle. Poems that glorified honorable death and ridiculed cowardice. They learned dance, but war dance. Movements that mimicked combat and taught group coordination. They learned about honor, about the Spartan code that was stricter than any written law. A Spartan did not fight for personal glory. That was the vain boast of Athenians and other weak Greeks. He fought for the Phalanx, for the line, for the brother at his side. His shield protected not just himself, but the man to his left. His spear killed not for personal ambition, but for the collective's survival. The law of honorable death. The only dishonor greater than death in Sparta was returning defeated. There was a phrase every Spartan mother said to her sons before battle, a phrase that encapsulated everything about their culture. Return with your shield or on it. With the shield meant victorious, because a defeated warrior would discard the heavy bronze shield to run faster in flight. On the shield meant dead, because that was how comrades carried the fallen from the battlefield. Victorious or dead. There was no third option, no acceptable surrender, no honorable retreat. Soldiers who fled battle faced not just social ostracism, but complete loss of rights. They could not marry, could not participate in public assemblies, could not wear citizens' clothing. They were marked as cowards and treated as living ghosts, worse than dead. This was the culture that forged the 300 Leonidas chose. Men who knew no fear because they had been taught from childhood that honorable death was preferable to dishonorable life. Men who did not falter before impossible odds because their entire lives had been impossible. Men who were more war machines than individual human beings, and proud of it. Part 3. The Pass of Death. Geography of Destiny. Leonidas chose the battle site with strategic genius that would be studied by military commanders for the next 2,500 years. Thermopylae, whose name literally means hot gates, due to the sulfurous hot springs bubbling in the area, was a narrow pass squeezed between the steep mountains of Mount Kallidromos and the turbulent waters of the Malian Gulf. The geography was brutal and perfect. At its narrowest point, the pass was only 15 meters wide, 15 meters between mountains too steep for an army to climb and a sea too deep to ford. It was the only viable path between northern and southern Greece. Any army wanting to invade the south had to pass through there, and there, in that natural bottleneck, numbers would not matter. 1,000,000 men could not attack at once. It did not matter if Xerxes had 100,000 soldiers or 1,000,000. In the pass, only a few dozen could fight simultaneously. They would have to come in waves, and each wave would be met by the Spartan Phalanx, the most lethal combat formation ever devised by the human mind. The Phalanx, human killing machine. To understand what happened at Thermopylae, it is essential to understand the Spartan Phalanx. It was not just a military formation. It was a combat philosophy, a physical expression of all Spartan culture. The Phalanx was a living wall of bronze and iron, circular bronze shield, the hoplon from which the word hoplite comes, each nearly a meter in diameter and weighing about 7 kilograms, overlapping to form a virtually impenetrable barrier. Each shield covered the left side of the warrior carrying it and the right side of the man to his left. This meant his survival depended on the man beside him not breaking, not retreating, not failing. The phalanx worked or collapsed as a single unit, 3-meter spears, the dory, projecting forward like the spines of a giant porcupine, bronze tips sharp as razors, capable of penetrating light armor or flesh with deadly ease. Thus, a first row of spears attacked. The second and third rows added weight and replaced broken spears, and behind the shields, wearing bronze helmets that covered nearly the entire face, cuirasses protecting the torso, greaves protecting the shins. Men trained from childhood to move as a single organism, every movement synchronized, every step calculated. When the phalanx advanced, it advanced like a wave of metal. When it retreated without breaking formation. When it turned as if all the men shared one mind. The key was absolute discipline. A brilliant but undisciplined man broke the formation and killed everyone around him. An ordinary man, but perfectly synchronized, made the phalanx unbeatable, and the Spartans had trained their entire lives for that synchronization. The clash of worlds. When the Persians arrived and saw the 300 Spartans positioned in the pass, along with the other Greeks Leonidas had managed to gather, they laughed. Xerxes, seated on his golden throne on a nearby hill where he could observe the battle in aristocratic safety, sent messengers demanding that the Greeks surrender their weapons and submit to the great king. Leonidas's response entered history, 2 words in laconic Greek that would echo through the millennia. Molon Labe, come and take them. It was not empty bravado. It was not posturing to impress allies. It was a simple statement of fact. If Xerxes wanted the Spartan weapons, he would have to pry them from their dead hands. There was no possible negotiation, no middle ground. It was freedom or death, and the Spartans had already chosen. Part 4. 3 days that changed the world. The first day, clash of realities, when the sun rose over Thermopylae on the first day of battle, illuminating the blue waters of the Gulf and the gray stones of the pass, the Persians advanced with the confidence of those who had never been truly challenged. Waves of Persian soldiers, thousands of men wearing reinforced leather armor, carrying short spears and light wicker shields, marched into the pass and met the Spartan phalanx waiting. What followed was a massacre. The Persians, accustomed to fighting in loose formations, relying on mobility and superior numbers, encountered a wall of bronze that simply would not yield. Their short spears could not reach beyond the Spartan shields. Their light armor was easily penetrated by the long Greek spears. Their wicker shields were shattered by the weight of the Spartan charge. And the Spartans did not fight as individuals seeking personal glory. They fought as a cold, calculated machine. When the front line tired after minutes of brutal combat, It retreated in perfect sync and was replaced by the second line, fresh men against exhausted Persians. When a spear broke, and spears broke constantly, splintered by impact against armor and bone, another replaced it instantly. When a man fell, wounded or dead, another closed the gap in seconds, maintaining the integrity of the shield wall. The endless slaughter. Herodotus, our primary chronicler of these events who traveled Greece and Persia collecting survivor testimonies, records that the Persians died by the thousands. The numbers are debated by modern historians. Herodotus certainly exaggerated, as ancient chroniclers often did, but even conservative estimates speak of thousands of Persian casualties on the first day alone. The bodies piled up so high that the Spartans had to periodically stop to clear the battlefield, dragging Persian corpses and throwing them into the sea, or stacking them at the pass's edge. If they did not, the corpses would form ramps, allowing the Persians to literally climb over their own dead and bypass the Greek defenses. The blood flowed so copiously that it made the ground slippery. The air grew thick with the smell of blood, feces, and entrails, the characteristic stench of an ancient battlefield. The August heat caused the bodies to begin rotting quickly, adding the reek of decomposition to the nauseating mix. Xerxes, seated on his golden throne on a nearby hill where he could watch without soiling himself with his subjects' blood, watched in disbelief. Herodotus records that he rose from his throne 3 times in panic as he saw his best troops annihilated by a handful of Greeks. 3 times he jumped from his seat, unable to believe what he was witnessing. How was it possible? How were a few thousand Greeks massacring his finest soldiers? The Greek coalition. But Leonidas was not entirely alone at Thermopylae. He had his 300 Spartans, the royal guard, the absolute elite. But he had also managed to gather about 7,000 soldiers from other Greek cities that had answered the desperate call for help. Thespians from Thespiae, Thebans from Thebes, Phocians, Locrians, Corinthians, good men, brave soldiers, many veterans of other wars, but they were not Spartans, and the difference was visible even to casual observers. While the allied soldiers fought with courage, sometimes with impressive ferocity, the Spartans fought with a mechanical coldness that bordered on the supernatural. No passion, no anger, no visible fear, just precise movements, tested by thousands of hours of training. Killing was their craft, and they practiced it with the competence of master artisans. A Thespian might kill 5 Persians and be celebrated as a hero. A Spartan killed the same number, and it was just another day at work. Their faces, hidden by bronze helmets that covered everything except the eyes and mouth, showed no emotion. They killed with the same expression they might wear while plowing a field or mending a sandal. The night between battles. At night, after the first day of apocalyptic battle, while the Persians camped at a safe distance, demoralized and frightened, the Spartans followed their nightly routines with unshakable discipline. They tended their wounds, and there were many, for even the best armor did not completely prevent injuries in prolonged combat. Each man cared for his comrade's wounds, applying bandages, cauterizing cuts with hot iron when necessary. They sharpened their weapons methodically. Spears needed tips reforged when broken. Swords needed sharpening on whetstones they had brought. Dented armor needed hammering back into shape. Broken shields needed replacement or repair. And they sang. They sang ancient hymns, songs of Sparta, melodies their fathers had sung, and their fathers' fathers before them. There was no fear in their eyes as they looked toward the horizon, where tens of thousands of Persian campfires twinkled in the darkness. They had already accepted death before leaving Sparta. For a true Spartan, death was not something to fear. It was merely the inevitable end of a life lived with honor. A Persian soldier captured during the first day of battle later recounted in testimony that survives in historical fragments that hearing the Spartans sing on the night before battle was the most terrifying thing he had ever experienced. They were not thunderous war chants, not shouts of defiance or boasting. They were funeral songs, songs for the dead. They were literally bidding farewell to life, preparing for the journey to Hades, and that, according to the Persian prisoner, was infinitely more frightening than any war bravado, because it showed those men had no fear. How do you defeat men who already consider themselves dead? The second day, the Immortals Fall. On the second day, Xerxes, furious at the previous day's humiliation, decided to use his most feared weapon. He unleashed the Immortals, 10,000 elite warriors who were the terror of the entire Persian Empire, so called because whenever one died in battle, he was immediately replaced by another, keeping the number constant at exactly 10,000. The death of individuals did not matter. The Immortals as an institution were eternal. They were Persia's best soldiers, chosen from the finest warriors of all the empire's satrapies, dressed in elaborate armor, decorated with gold and silver, wearing colorful clothing underneath to display status, trained from childhood in Persian military academies, veterans of dozens of campaigns across 3 continents. They had conquered from Babylon to Egypt, from Thrace to India. They had faced every type of enemy and always prevailed, and they were massacred. The Spartan phalanx was simply superior, superior technically, superior tactically, superior in every way that mattered in close-quarters combat in confined space. Persian armor, though beautiful and expensive, was lighter than Greek, designed for mobility in open fields. In the narrow pass, mobility did not matter. Protection did, and the Spartans had better protection. Persian spears were shorter than Greek ones. In open combat, this allowed greater control and speed. In the pass, it meant the Persians had to close in more to strike, entering the kill zone of the Spartan spears. For every Persian who managed a blow, 3 were skewered before reaching striking distance. Persian training focused on individual combat, on each warrior's personal skill, on duels and feats that brought honor. Spartan training annihilated individualism and created a collective machine. Against the bronze wall where every man protected his brother and discipline was absolute, the world's best individual fighters had no chance. Xerxes' dilemma. But Xerxes had a resource Leonidas did not have and never would: virtually unlimited numbers. He could lose 1,000 men a day for years. Not that he wanted to, but he could, and still have a formidable army. He could rotate fresh troops constantly while the Spartans fought without real rest. He could attack from multiple directions simultaneously, forcing the Greeks to divide their already tiny forces. Leonidas had no such luxury. He could not afford to lose even 300 men. Every casualty was irreplaceable. Every wound weakened the line. Every death created a gap that made everyone around more vulnerable. And no matter how superior they were, the Spartans were human. They tired, they injured, they bled. The math was simple and brutal. Eventually, no matter how well they fought, they would be overwhelmed by exhaustion or die from accumulated wounds. It was a matter of time. And